I fixed a ship that no one believed existed, and what it revealed about Jesus changed everything I thought I knew. This is not an attention trick. This is not mythology. This is an account that touches on history, faith, and something that behaves like consciousness itself. Forget the neat certainties you were taught. Forget the lectures that said miracles are only metaphors. What I will describe will illuminate corners you never looked at, and it may cast shadows you were not ready to meet. Warning: this material can be unsettling. If you are willing to confront a truth that challenges institutions and comforts alike, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let me tell you how it began. It happened on a damp afternoon in a warehouse outside Tucson where the desert smell mixed with solder and oil. Marcus brought the hull, covered in dust and an odd salt-like residue. He set it on my work table like you would set down a broken radio. Elena took a photograph. Pastor Samuel refused to enter the room. The first time I ran my hands along its seam, I felt a low hum in my bones, like a memory waking. The first image that came through was not geometric, but theological. That was the beginning. The night of discovery was ordinary until it became impossible. I was cataloging circuits and inscriptions when a shard of polished crystal, embedded in the ship like a tooth, flashed with a pattern that felt like script and melody at once. The air in the warehouse cooled. I ate the silence with my eyes and heard someone whisper in a language that carried the cadence of an old hymn and the precise clarity of a scanner. I called Dr. Rafi to record the frequency. We found a frequency that matched nothing in our databases and yet resonated with an audio fragment from a gospel manuscript that Claire had translated. The witnesses were simple people who smelled like grease and coffee. Officer Alvarez stood by the door and counted heartbeats. Miriam, Marcus' wife, touched the crystal and said she saw fields she had never walked, trees that wept light. The first evidence was an audio spectrogram and a pattern of marks etched into the hull that matched an iconography from a 2nd century codex. At that moment, my choice split between sealing the thing up forever or listening. I chose to listen. The contact felt like negotiation rather than invasion. It communicated in images, sensations, and short phrases that landed directly inside my head. It did not use speech, it used telepathy, a voice colored by metallic timbre and the warm cadence of an old preacher. In the dialogue that followed, I spoke in questions and it replied in echoes. I asked who it was. It said it had been a witness. I asked why it was here. It said it carried a record. I asked what record. It said the name Jesus and then a constellation. Of memories that did not match any one faith, but bent around one human life. The ship did not claim divinity. It claimed preservation. I argued with it about faith and fact. It replied with images of towns long gone and a carpenter speaking in parables while air tasted of rosemary and dust. Pastor Samuel asked if we were desecrating something sacred. The ship said it was a library. Marcus asked if it could heal. The ship answered with a vibration that moved along my palm and warmed the scar tissue there. In that decision, the moral weight fell on me. Do I repair what might be a relic, or do I dismantle unknown technology that offers truths dangerous to institutions? I chose repair because secrets trapped in silence rot. What followed was meticulous work. The repair process required patience, precision, and a translation of a material logic that felt halfway between electronics and ritual. I mapped circuits as if reading prayers. I cleaned oxidation with distilled water and a soft brush. I applied a solvent that reacted with the crystal and shifted colors like stained glass at sunrise. The dialogue at the bench expanded into long exchanges with the artifact itself. I would ask about a symbol, and the ship would project a simple hologram of a scene in which a man is teaching by the shore, and children place their hands on the wood of a boat. I would ask about translation, and it would answer by aligning a glowing filament with a word from Claire's notes and a tone that matched a frequency Dr. Rafi had measured in an old chant. Elena and Jonah traced inscriptions with gloves and recorded data. Each small fix changed the ship's responses. When I soldered a joint that had been cold for centuries, the hull shed a tone that sounded like a choir singing a single phrase of Aramaic. The technical descriptions were precise. A resonant cavity inside the crystal acted like a storage matrix. It stored pattern sequences that correlated with human memory when stimulated at 23.5 Hz and a harmonic overtone near 4,000 Hz. That stimulation brought forth images as layered and interpretive as dreams, but with a consistency that felt like eyewitness testimony. The work took days and left me smelling of solder and rosemary and old wood. During repair, the backstory of why I was there became unavoidable and necessary to tell. I grew up in a town of red clay and open skies, where the church bell marked the hours, and my father taught me to take things apart before accepting they were unfixable. My adolescence was split between an apprenticeship under a machinist named Horace and private nights in a library where I read early Christian poems until dawn. I studied mechanical engineering and then detoured into conservation, because machines break, and so do memories. I carried a loss that shaped everything. My mother disappeared when I was 19 and left a Bible page folded into a box of tools. I never reconciled with the church hierarchy that explained her grief away as fate. Instead, I learned to look for causes and not just comforts. That loss made me skeptical of tidy answers and hungry for fragments that might complete a story. It also made me tender with relics and wary of institutions that prefer silence to disruption. So when an impossible ship arrived, I approached it with hands that could both mend metal and read a scripture fold at dawn. There are moments that tighten the air into something like fear. The first moment came when the ship projected a hologram of a crowded street, where a man raised a hand and the crowd fell silent. I felt my chest contract and my throat close. Alina whispered that she recognized the gesture from an illuminated manuscript. Pastor Samuel crossed himself and asked if we were summoning something. The ship answered with a sound that felt like agreement and a smell of cedar. The second moment was when a scientist from a university threatened to remove the artifact for analysis. He said we could not be trusted. I saw the ship flicker, and the projection included a council hall where voices argued over scripture and power. My hands trembled as I tightened a bolt. The third moment came when a local elder named Rosa accused us of playing God. Her voice rose, and the community gathered at the warehouse gates. The ship pulsed and sent a warmth that touched Rosa's hand and made her knees unsteady. She wept in a language none of us understood. The fourth moment was the night the lights went out and the ship shone from within like a lighthouse. Voices whispered in our heads, and the outline of a man walking on rough ground appeared and receded. Each moment pressed me to choose between hiding the thing or naming what it suggested. I chose to name. Around the midpoint of this story, I asked the viewers to speak back to us. If this sounds impossible, I know what you are thinking. I too thought it was impossible at first. If you have ever experienced something you could not explain, write in the comments beginning with "I saw," if you have, or "I did not," if you have not. Tell us one detail, however small. We read everything. Your notes help us map patterns and decide what to investigate next. This is not about belief. It is about collecting data and stories. When you share, we create a community that can see overlaps between accounts that alone would look random. Your voice matters to us because the ship seemed to archive not only historical events, but the way people experience them. Now, back to how we confronted what the ship revealed. The theoretical revelation was terrible in its clarity and simple in its claim. The ship did not proclaim theology. It presented a sequence of notations, a register that linked a first-century itinerant teacher with phenomena the ship associated with human resonance. The hologram showed small scenes of bread shared, eyes that locked like a vow, and a man who spoke in riddles and healed through touch. The ship's record used the word Jesus not as doctrine, but as a node in a network of resonance. It suggested that what we call miracles were events where intention aligned with a field the ship could detect and amplify. The explanation combined historical fragments, writings, translations, and sensory archives. The ship produced a projection of a text that Claire identified as a marginal gloss referencing a lost parable about a frequency of compassion. Dr. Rafi analyzed the audio and found harmonics that corresponded to vocal patterns still used in certain monastic chants. The shock came when the ship presented a mapped correlation between those chants and the physiological responses of people in the hologram. The implication was that practices now labeled ritual could have been techniques to manipulate a subtle field. This struck institutions as heresy and researchers as a hypothesis worth testing. To test the revelation, we built a small experiment. Step 1. Prepare a simple altar space with 3 crystals oriented toward the north, a glass of water, and a shard of wood no larger than a coin. Step 2. Align a tone generator to replicate the ship's primary harmonic at 23.5 Hz. Then slowly introduce the overtone near 4,000 Hz. Step 3. Place your hand over the crystals and breathe in a 4-count, out a 4-count rhythm for 5 minutes. Step 4. Record the subject's heart rate and ask for a single memory to surface without prompting. We ran this with volunteers under controlled conditions. Expectation was minimal. Result was consistent. The water in the glass formed micro-patterns, and some subjects reported a memory that was not theirs, yet felt true. One volunteer named Jonah described smelling lemonwood and saying a name he had never heard. We documented the steps, the equipment, the timing, and the subjective reports. The experiment did not prove divinity. It showed correlation and a reproducible effect under specific conditions. Critics argued about placebo and suggestion. Supporters said we had found a reproducible bridge between ritual and physiological response. The proof was practical and small, and it unsettled both sides. Transformation came slow and noisy. I lost simple anonymity. Pastor Samuel faced his congregation and could not deny what he had felt when touching the ship. He was asked to resign by elders who feared scandal. Claire's translation work was praised by colleagues and attacked in equal measure. Dr. Rafi published a paper that was peer-reviewed and then questioned on ethical grounds. Marcus's family received attention they had not wanted. Officer Alvarez's reports made a precinct record and then vanish into an institutional drawer. Miriam returned to the neighborhood with eyes that had seen something she could not explain, and neighbors who whispered at her kitchen door. The first clear sign of societal pressure arrived as a visit from an archaeology board that demanded custody. They used legal language and bureaucratic force. The second sign was a viral post that framed the story as fraud and invited harassment. The third was a small gathering of believers who came with candles and prayers and left with a sense of wonder. The human cost was real. Institutions sought to domesticate the event. Communities sought meaning. Individuals were transformed in private ways. The ship's record did not erase faith. It complicated it in public and deepened it in private. People named in this phase included Marcus, Elena, Pastor Samuel, Dr. Rafi, Officer Alvarez, Miriam, Jonah, Claire, and Rosa. Each reacted differently, and the scene became a study in how truth and power collide. 1 month later, certain things had changed in ways subtle and measurable. I noticed a sharpening in my thinking and a sleep pattern altered by the ship's hum. People in the neighborhood reported a reduction in neighborly disputes and an increase in shared meals. Marcus started hosting evenings where people would come and describe a single memory of kindness. He called it the record evenings. Pastor Samuel found a quieter way to preach that focused on practice rather than doctrine. Claire received permission to study fragments she never expected to access. 3 months in, the ship's core rhythm started to synchronize with a small set of community chants, and localized instances of reduced pain were reported by 3 volunteers in our experiment. We documented each case with timestamps, recordings, and witness statements. The university issued a tentative grant to study the phenomenon under controlled conditions. 6 months later, the thing that most felt like progress was not a paper or a sermon, but a small farmer who had reconciled with his estranged brother after attending one of Marcus's sessions. The ship remained contentious. The church hierarchy maintained caution disguised as inquiry. The most eloquent result was quiet. People had begun to notice frequency in their own lives and to use it as a tool for empathy, not power. At the center of everything, I had to answer what I saw about Jesus. The ship did not replace Scripture, nor did it diminish the sacred. It offered an archival voice that suggested a human figure whose life resonated in ways science can begin to measure and ritual can replicate in microcosm. For some, this was heresy. For others, it was a lifeline. I will not tell you to abandon belief or to accept a technical metaphysics in place of prayer. I will tell you that what I saw asked for humility and curiosity. It asked institutions to open archives and communities to share practices without weaponizing them. It asked that we hold doctrine and data in a dialogue rather than a duel. If this story moved you, subscribe and join. A community that values evidence, narrative, and compassion. If you have a private experience, write in the comments starting with "I saw" or "I did not," so we can understand patterns. We will read and we will respond. In the end, the ship taught me that truth has layers like sedimentary rock, and that some layers are revealed only when someone with patience and a willingness to be unsettled starts to scrape away what covers them. The practical proof we recorded was small and manageable, and yet it rippled outward in ways that changed a village, a pulpit, and a family. Institutions will argue. Some will call it technology, others will call it miracle, and some will call it fraud. My choice was not to name it once and for all, but to document and to invite others to test and to be brave enough to look. If you want to follow this investigation, subscribe and turn on notifications. Tell us in the comments about a moment that shifted your certainty. We will keep sharing recordings, diagrams, and interviews, and we will keep trying to repair what the world brings to us so that memory and meaning can find each other. Remember this phrase as you leave this account with a thought. The archive of the impossible is only dangerous until we learn to read it with humility.